Hello everyone, welcome to the baddest indie horror game awards of 2023. This is an idea I had for a couple months now. At the end of the year, or beginning of 2024, we do a little recap on the releases of 2023 in the indie horror genre, and I give my thoughts on like the best and the worst, and also get some input from the community. It was just a little idea I had, and I think it's a good way to close off 2023. So this is how this is going to work. I have a list of different categories, and I'm going to name my top 3 indie horror games of the year that did the best in those categories. And since this is my thing and not like a formal thing on TV, I can do whatever I want with this, which means there's also a best and worst of the year category, and I just find that very funny. I'm just here basically to give my opinion on some different games that came out this year, some that won't or haven't gotten their own videos. A lot of games actually came out this year, more than I realized, honestly. So I think this is just a good way to recap my thoughts on them. But I also ran a survey amongst you guys to give me your best and worst in the field of the year, and after over 400 of you voted on it, I have a definitive best and worst. One more rule that I need to mention is that I only allowed one game per franchise per category. So, for example, a lot of Ban games came out this year, so there can't be multiple in a single category. So, as much as it would be amazing to see Ban get all top 3 of the worst of the year from you guys, that's not how it's going to work. So, whatever the most voted Ban game was for worst of the year is what will be on the list. The same goes for FNAF or anything else that had multiple entries released this year. And yeah, again, there's going to be a top 3 for each category. There's going to be third place, second place, and first place in that order for each category. All of this is just decided based on my opinion, and I'll explain it to you briefly, except for the one where I let you guys vote on it. So yeah, let's get into it. We got a few categories here. I hope you enjoy this, and if you do, I will do this again next year. The first category is Best Art Direction in an Indie Horror Game. What I was looking for this was obviously just sheer quality and impressiveness of the visuals, but also creativity, uniqueness, how much the style itself enhances the experience. That's the kind of stuff I was looking for. So in third place, I gotta give it to Slay the Princess from Black Tabby Games. This game has a really intriguing and creative, sketchy style. It has very creative but disturbing character design. It's very fascinating to me the way the story is told through environmental and character art. It has a very angelic aesthetic, but it's also very creepy. This game is genuinely disturbing and a standout horror game, despite not being outwardly scary, as like some others are. Yeah, I think a visual novel's art style can definitely be a hit or miss, or a make or break kind of situation, and for this game, it was just outstanding and really elevated the experience for me. At number 2, I have The Coffin of Andy and Lily by Nemli. I think that's how you say the name. This art style is very dark and gritty. It kind of has a vampiric aesthetic that I really like. The stylistic choices really help enhance the themes of this game, which are mostly about childhood neglect and trauma. The horror of this game is really creative and done very well through its environment work, its character work. I love the character designs. The general artwork of this game is very varied, very stylistic, very dark, and it really enhanced the overall experience and what the game was going for me. I loved the way this game looked throughout the entire runtime. However, my number 1 for Best Art Direction is going to be The Bunny Graveyard from Pishon Games. I don't know how you say that. This game's pixel art is outstanding, and the animation work in its pixel art is so beautiful, it's so clean. The character designs are very distinct and creative, and surprisingly horrific for how generally cutesy the game is. It has a pleasant combination of cute and colorful locations and characters, and also dark and horrific ones. It's so varied in its art style, it's so high quality. Just simply the way this game looked made it a million times better for me. I absolutely love the style this game went for, and I can't wait to see more of it. But moving on from visuals, we got the sounds. We're going to be talking about the best original soundtrack in an indie horror game. Coming at number 3, I gotta give it to Rewind or Die from Comp 3 Interactive. The music in this game feels like it's from a cheesy slasher movie, and that's exactly what I would have wanted it to be. The main theme is over the top and fitting for how cheesy it is. There's hard rock instrumentals for the chase sequences. All the music is really fun and aggressive sounding. And the final boss music is also very over the top and silly and makes for such a fun, grand conclusion to this really interesting slasher-style game. But for number 2, I'm going to give it to The Coffin of Andy and Lily from Nemli. The soundtrack is very fun and silly, and again, very vampiric feeling. The instrumentals are really creative and they're so dark and twisted. There's this one track that's an instrumental made out of everyday sounds that twist it into dark and distorted music. All the distorted sounds in the soundtrack creates such a discomforting feeling. It's all very interesting and creative, and again, really enhanced the overall aesthetic of the game for me. However, for number 1 in this category, I am giving it to Slay the Princess from Black Tabby Games. All the music is ridiculously high quality, it's so well produced, it's very emotionally impactful, surprisingly. It has a very angelic sound to it, but it's still very off-putting and dark and twisted, really fitting the game's visual style and also narrative. This game is so well crafted, and its OST is no exception. Genuinely one of the best I've heard of anything all year. Moving on to the next category, I want to talk about the best sound design in an indie horror game. At the start, for number 3, I want to give it to the Bunny Graveyard from that dev. I like the way the sound design is worked well into the mechanics of the game and how you need to listen out in certain sections of the game to know where to go. And also the need to focus on the audio of the game enhances the horror elements that the game does have. I just think the sound design in some of the sections of this game was really cool and well worked into the game's mechanics. Really good time. For number 2, I want to give it to Slender the Arrival Remake from Blue Isle Studios. Slender's sound design is better and scarier than ever before in this remake. The ambience and the atmosphere really enhances the horror. I love all the glitchy sound effects that happen suddenly during the midst of all the loud wind and just sounds of a forest. Yeah, this game is just generally beautiful, and I feel like the ambience throughout the whole thing just really helps encapsulate that feeling. It's just a really solid horror game, and it would not be the same without its just high-quality sound design. But at number 1 for best sound design of the year, I gotta give it to Lethal Company by Zeekers, simply because this is the best proximity chat has ever been. I love the way proximity chat is affected by the environment and the way everyone sounds differently depending on where they are, whether that means echoey areas causes echoes, or being in a place that's all metallic has a weird metallic-y kind of echo. I'm not good at describing the way sound works. But yeah, proximity chat and just voice chat in general has never been better in a game, period. Because I've never seen a game where it's done as well as this, where the environments and situations affect the way people sound. It's just makes the game so much cooler. Moving on from sounds and looks, I want to talk about the best storytelling in an indie horror game. At number 3, I am giving it to Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin from Steel Will Studios and Scott Games. I know I don't like this game, and I know I don't want to talk about this game, but this game genuinely did this one thing very, very well. The way the environments help tell the story is really unique and interesting and actually executed very well. The character development is a standout in the indie horror space, with the main character feeling like a real character, Roxanne Wolf being one of the best characters in arguably the whole franchise. And the Five Nights at Freddy's story as a whole was pushed into a much more straightforward direction with this game. The narrative is actually just that, a narrative, start to finish, with a decent start and ending. I just think this game actually tells its story really well within the indie horror genre, and I don't hate it. I can't hate that about it. This game is really creative in its storytelling, and I gotta give it its props for that. At number 2, I want to give it to Slay the Princess from Black Tabby Games. I know we've talked about them a lot up to this point, but it's just that good of a game. There's really creative use of characters in this game that act as different feelings and also tones, and it's really fascinating the way that's executed. The amount of decisions and options in this game is extremely detailed, and it's really impressive how replayable the game is because of that, but also just how much there is to learn and hear and engage with. And the game really manages to be disturbing and beautiful at the same time, simply through its tone and vocabulary, and I love the way this game explores a narrative in such an abstract way that's clearly meant to be very metaphorical and bizarre. It's one of the weirdest games I've ever played in my career. Like, in the indie horror genre, which is already weird as hell, it's one of the weirdest ones I've played. But it's so fascinating, genuinely disturbing, and legitimately beautiful for that. It is a standout visual novel, and a great example of storytelling. But number 1 for me goes to The Coffin of Andy and Lily from Nemli. There's some really fascinating themes of codependency and child neglect all over this game, and it's written and portrayed in a really disturbing way that I can't help but feel engaged by. The characters are very engaging and well written, and although they're literally manic and crazy, they feel very real, and that is off-putting to me. There's some really amazing uses of dream sequences and flashbacks that explore the characters and their history without interfering with the driving narrative, and they give a lot more context, they give a bit of an explanation as to why they are the way they are, why they are where they are currently at a given time. It's a really disturbing story that's really discomforting, but it's executed in such a perfect way that it was engaging the whole time, and I gotta give it a lot of props for that. Going into the next category, though, we got the scariest indie horror game. This is a purely personal thing, this is a very subjective thing, of course, but this is just these are just the top 3 games that were able to frighten me the most, which is obviously what a horror game is meant to do. At number 3, we have a really seemingly random pick of a game called Choppy Hetty from Gail Suzka. Yeah, I don't think any of you know what this game is, and that's because it's not one of the best games of the year, it's kinda mid overall, but I'm gonna be real, I think it's one of the scarier ones of the year. This game consists of being trapped in a very cramped maze being chased by a crazed killer with a chainsaw. The restrictions of said area causes a surprising amount of tension. The sound design really elevates the horror with its dark and distorted ambience, the sounds of chainsaws approaching you, and the sounds of people suffering all around you. Just the setting of this game alone makes it genuinely frightening because you feel like you're trapped the entire time, desperately trying to get out. And that makes interactions with the killer that much more frightening when you're in just dead hallways the whole time, and then suddenly they're there. It's actually pretty damn frightening a lot of the time. At number 2, though, I do want to give it to Rewind or Die by Comp3 Interactive. This game has some of the best chase sequences I've seen in an indie horror game, which says a lot given that they're attempted frequently. They build a lot of tension through the use of music and sound design, as well as the surprise factor in certain sections where you are unsure where the slasher is. Just the chases alone make this game genuinely terrifying. I really love the slasher in it, and again, the use of music and sound design in these chases always gets me. But at number 1 for Scariest of the Year, I'm giving it to Slender the Arrival Remake from Blue Isle Studios. The atmosphere of this game creates a feeling of getting lost, and that makes Slender's appearance much more intimidating and frightening. The sheer quality of this game adds a sense of realism, enhancing the horror of everything that's supernatural. Every sequence in this game and every section of this game is just so stunning and well done, and that makes it really disturbing whenever something horror happens. Slender's presence as a silent figure is startling whenever noticeable, and legitimately terrifying when especially close. And again, I think this is the best example of Slender and Slender AI ever. This is such a high-quality game that it's consistently scary, and its use of sound design, its use of Slender, its use of visuals, all genuinely terrifying. I think it's the scariest indie horror game of the year. Moving on, we got a little more of a fun category. We got Best Fan Game of the Year. Believe it or not, they're all FNAF fan games. Hopefully this will change with bendy fan games being a bigger thing, and also there will be some other fan works of games like Dark Deception, hopefully Poppy Playtime, and other things like that. But for now, we got 3 FNAF fan games. At number 3, I want to give it to A Bite at Freddy's from legendary fan game dev Garrett McKay. This game has really creative and unique versions of the FNAF cast that really stand out in fan-made work. It has pretty fun gameplay that's well-balanced and interesting. The visuals are really high quality, and this game has great environment work. These are all very, strong points of Garrett's abilities. I also like that this game has a bit of a silly sense of humor. It's a little more playful than it is scary, and you know what? I can appreciate that about it. It also has a lot of replayability in the custom night, and there's a lot you can do with it, so that's always a good sign for a FNAF fan game, is if they're replayable. Yeah, I just think A Bite of Freddy's is a really cute premise with a lot of good visuals and an overall fun and unique game. At number 2, I want to give it to Mechanism from legendary FNAF YouTuber Andy Matronic. This game has really charming and well-done arcade-style visuals, and it's really exciting and challenging in its gameplay. It's overall a really creative and fun idea within the fan game scene. It also has a lot of replayability because there's different endings, and it's also ridiculously difficult. This is just one of the hardest fan games I've ever played. But hey, it's a lot of fun, it's a great time, and I highly recommend it. But the best fan game of the year has to be Playtime with Percy from Fazzy Funbear. This game has a fantastic visual style that combines both 2D and 3D artwork that doesn't clash but enhances each other's qualities. It has a very fun gameplay loop that's varied and satisfying and very creative. Post-night sequences are all enjoyable, and they all add to the experience that do not interfere with the flow of the game. It has a ridiculously good and exciting soundtrack. It has a very exciting boss fight at the end that highlights the qualities of the game and also FNAF as a whole. It has plenty of replayability in its custom night with challenges, and also it gives you a rank for each level that you do, so you can always replay those to get it better, and it's also just really fun, so it's worth replaying. This is a shining example of a FNAF fan game, one of the best easily. Shout out to everyone that worked on this one. This game is absolutely stunning, fan game or not. Really amazing category for me. Next, we got Best Adaptation. It's the FNAF movie. I'm giving it to the FNAF movie. I'm only here to talk about the FNAF movie, because this category only exists because the FNAF movie was snubbed from the Game Awards. And yes, I do mean this. I don't think this movie is just a good FNAF movie. I genuinely think it's a really solid movie. The narrative and characters were really enjoyable to follow, and I had a good time with them. The practical effects were very impressive, and the recreation of the iconic animatronics were absolutely stunning. The kills in the movie were surprisingly good and really shocking given the kid-friendly nature of the series in recent years. All of the kills were just really goddamn cool. The horror in the movie was also totally acceptable for a PG-13 horror movie, and I think all the horror was genuinely executed well, and I think people really overlook it a lot. And the soundtrack was outstanding and really enhanced the feeling of every single scene. I listen to the soundtrack on Spotify every now and then. I just think this is a good movie, so it's the best adaptation in the indie horror scene of the year. What a shocker that is. Hey, when Bendy comes out, we can talk about that, alright? Alright, we're approaching the best and worst categories, but next up we got Best Mascot Horror Game of the year. What defines a mascot horror game has gotten more broad and abstract over the years, especially in recent time. I'm not here to argue about that though, these are all mascot horror games, and I will hear nothing of it. At number 3, I'm going to give it to Amanda the Adventurer from Mangled Maw Games. This game has some really creative and fun puzzles in a unique setting for an escape room type of game, and it has plenty of memorable moments and scares that are at least decent. The use of analog horror is significantly better than the majority of indie horror games. I wouldn't say this is one of the best indie horror games of the year by any means. A lot of people like this game more than I do personally, but it's fun and it's creative. It has a couple of cute characters, some decent scares, and I think it deserves a lot of credit for that, and I do think this is one of the best mascot horror games of the year. At number 2, I'm giving it to My Friendly Neighborhood from John Zimansky and Evan Zimansky. This game introduced survival horror to the mascot horror scene, and it did it very well. The gameplay is really fun and exciting, and it's actually really enjoyable to revisit. It has an adorable cast of puppets that make the game bright and colorful, which is always appealing to especially people in the mascot horror scene. It has a lot of additional content and got updated a lot this year after its release, so it's very replayable, and I think that's a really important thing in this type of game. This is a simply solid game that's really fun to play, and it's really unique, and it's a fun take on survival horror. This is easily one of the best mascot horror games of all time, let alone the year, and I think it deserves all the praise it's been given throughout this year. But at number 1, I'm going to give it to Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2 from Steelwool Studios and Scott Games. This game has ridiculously high quality models and environments. This game is absolutely beautiful. One of the best VR games I've ever seen. Visually speaking, I mean. I'm not saying it's one of the best VR games ever. This game's collection of mini-games is really fun, it's consistently enjoyable, and a lot of them are really, really charming. This is the best FNAF game in a very, very long time, and I would say it's in my top 4 of the series. It was a pleasant surprise to me. I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's a standout in the franchise, honestly, and I think it is easily the best mascot horror game of the year. It's a really fun time, looks amazing. I just wish it focused a little more on the horror stuff, but you know what? I'll take what I can get with this series. Let's not get into that right now. This game's a lot of fun. I genuinely really like this game. All bias aside, I like this game a lot. Alright, now I have a category that is most underrated indie horror game of the year. Just want to give a little bit of a shout out to some games that aren't necessarily good enough to make it into some of these other categories, but absolutely deserve to be mentioned. At number 3, I want to give it to Playtown by TNP Games. This is the best version of the modern mascot horror scene we've been seeing this year. You know, the games that are very similar to Poppy Playtime, the games that have clearly been influenced by the Garten of Banban rabbit hole we've been going down. I think this is the best version of that type of game by a pretty significant margin. I think the rooms and environments are really cute, but also just really high quality and well done. I think the main monster is really cute as well, and I think they're actually very memorable again in this scene. I think the ending of this game is genuinely fantastic. with a lot of these Mascot horror games coming out, even if they're like okay, even if they're of a certain level of quality, a lot of the times they just don't have. They never have like a moment that really sticks with me. They never have like a moment or an element that sticks with me, even if they're generally decent. But the ending of this game has a chilling atmosphere and aesthetic, with some really nice music alongside it that genuinely just made me feel a lot, which I'm not used to getting out of these games, and that immediately made this game a lot better overall to me. It also just has a nice soundtrack overall, and I think a lot of the music is pretty damn good. Overall, this game is too generic in the space and needs to be more adventurous, and it also needs to focus on gameplay more. It's not the most fun game to play, but it is a significantly better take on this style of Mascot horror than most, and I think it deserves more credit for that. At number 2 for most underrated of the year, I want to give it to 123 Slaughter Me Street Super Retro from Nate Saunders and the rest of the team. This is a refreshing take on the 123 Slaughter Me Street formula, which is a Mascot horror game that was not very good and has since been pretty much forgotten. But this game is a charming reimagining of the premise and characters, and it's surprisingly fun. The gameplay is very satisfying, and it actually gets very tense during challenging moments. I think the reason this game went so under the radar is, one, again, 123 Slaughter Me Street is kind of forgotten. It's kind of a relic of the past, but also, this is a mobile game. It's the only mobile game on the list of games that came out this year. So, it's not surprising it didn't get much traction there. However, I think this game is really fun despite its simplicity. I actually think it's a really good time, and again, a really great take on 123 Slaughter Me Street. I had a good time with it. But for number 1, I am giving it to Rewind or Die from Comp 3 Interactive. I do not think this game deserved to be as overlooked as it was. This is one of the best examples of a low-poly PS1 style horror game. It has so many cool chase sequences that are all great. It has an amazing soundtrack, has some solid scares. I like the way the story progresses, and I think the character work is really good. It is a slasher movie as a video game, and it's the best example of that, and it's fire. This game should have gotten more attention. I'm annoyed that it didn't. This game is really good. Please play it. Peak gaming right here. And before we get into our best and worst indie horror games of the year, I want to go over the best indie horror devs/studios of the year. For this, I just took into account how much they were able to accomplish this year, how impressive their accomplishments were, that kind of thing. At number 3, I want to give a shout out to John Zimansky for My Friendly Neighborhood. As soon as this game dropped, the developer immediately started consistently updating the game that added more content and made it more replayable and just overall better, and I think that was really goddamn cool of him. The developer single-handedly reignited people's hope in Mascot horror and gave the fans of Mascot horror a game to actually be excited about, which we have not gotten in quite a long time. Yeah, I think John Zimansky did a lot for Mascot horror as a whole, which, like it or not, is the biggest subgenre in the indie horror scene, so I think they accomplished a lot with just this release alone. But again, they also kept updating a lot, which was really cool of them. At number 2, I'm giving it to technically two studios, Steelwool Studios and Scott Games, for all of their work on Five Nights at Freddy's. Steelwool and Scott Cawthon deserve credit, even if I'm not always a fan of their output. Ruin was a tremendous improvement over the base game of Security Breach, and it was pretty damn high quality for a free DLC. Help Wanted 2 was a very fun and high quality release and a major improvement over the original Help Wanted, and I genuinely think they deserve a lot of credit for that release. It's one of the best games in the FNAF series, just period. Steelwool was able to achieve a lot within a single year for an indie studio, and I gotta give them credit for that. And also, you can tell Scott Cawthon had a decent amount more input on the FNAF projects that released this year, and they were better for it. A lot of people don't really want to give Scott that credit, but you can tell that there was a period of time where he was absent, and that made some things worse, and now that he's kind of more active, it's honestly making things better. And also, Scott Cawthon achieved a lot in 2023. Even if I am not a fan of all of this output, even if I am not a fan of all of the work done, this was a very impressive year for Five Nights at Freddy's, and I want to give Steelwool Studios and Scott Games a lot of credit for what they were able to do in just 1 year. However, my number 1 for best indie dev or studio of the year is Zeekers for Lethal Company. Zeekers made one of the biggest games of the year on their own. You kinda gotta give them credit for that. Lethal Company is a genuinely really fun game that is well designed and replayable. It is the best multiplayer horror game by a pretty significant margin as far as I'm concerned. It's basically the only multiplayer game that's fun to play solo. Zeekerss made one of the biggest games of the year, and it happens to be an indie horror game. And they did it by themselves. They absolutely deserve to win this category for that. It isn't even really a close competition, despite how much FNAF content came out this year. Zeekerss for Lethal Company. Shouldn't have to explain too much about it. But now, we get to hear all of your voices. We're going to be talking about the worst indie horror game decided by you. Again, I ran a survey, over 400 of you responded. These are your guys' top 3 worst indie horror games of the year. At number 3, we got Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach Ruin from Steelwheel Studios and Scott Games, which got roughly 7% of the votes. Again, the reason that percentage is so low, and the reason this made the list at all, is because it's one game per franchise. And, let's just say, removing all the Ban games changed the results quite a bit. Look, I know I'm not the person to make this call, but this is not a fair pick. I'm gonna assume people didn't like just how formulaic it is, because it does feel underwhelming a lot of the time, and it is simply boring for a lot of the playtime. And I totally get that. It is a game that I personally do not like all that much. But as someone that did not like this game, and has a very strong bias against it, this does not deserve to be this high on the list. The fact that if you filter out the Ban series, this is in the top 3 worst, is not fair. You guys made a bad call on this one. But in second place, with also roughly 7% of the votes, we have Spectator from Neko Machine. This makes complete sense to me. Spectator has disgusting AI-generated work all over it. Everything is blatantly stolen. There is not a single original idea in this game. This game's formula is taken from I'm on observation duty, and it does everything worse than that game does. It is so horrifically optimized, it could borderline damage your computer. Everything about it is awful. I understand why it's on this list. But at number 1 for worst of the year, decided by you guys, is unsurprisingly Garden of Ban by the Euphoric Brothers. This game is a shocking showcase of incompetency in game development. It has zero originality, it has zero creativity, it has a hilariously short playtime with nothing to it, and it shows a clear decline in the standards for the indie horror genre. While probably not the actual worst of the year, this is totally deserved purely because of its influence and what it's done to us all. Yeah, this is your guys' pick for worst indie horror game of the year, and I don't blame you for it. But hey, let's lighten the mood, everyone. We got the best indie horror game decided by over 400 votes. At number 3, we got My Friendly Neighborhood by John Zimansky and Evan Zimansky. Yeah, this is a fun and creative game in the Mascot horror genre. It introduced survival horror to said genre. It's a really solid game. It's a lot of fun. It's replayable. Looks great. Plays great. Totally understandable decision from you guys. More than understandable. At number 2 for best decided by you guys, we got Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2 from Steelwheel Studios and Scott Games. This is a tremendous improvement over the original Help Wanted and a standout in the FNAF franchise as a whole. It has a lot of fun mini-games, has astoundingly good visuals. It's a really fun game. Another totally understandable pick from you guys. I think this is a great game, and I understand what you guys like about it. But number 1 goes to Lethal Company by Zeekerss. Totally understandable once again. This is the biggest indie horror game of the year for sure. It's a really fun multiplayer game. Has some pretty solid scares, really diverse and unique monsters. It's just a really fun game to play, and it was so big this year, I totally understand why it got so many votes. So yeah, those were your guys' pick for best and worst. Mostly agreeable decisions. I don't think Ruin should have been in the worst, but it wouldn't have been if we included all the Ban games, which, as I'm sure you're not surprised by, got plenty of the votes. But hey, now we're getting into my takes. This is my worst indie horror games of the year. Starting off at number 3, we got Abandoned Souls by Just Tom Cook. I thought this game may be punching down. I wasn't going to include it on this list or my indie horror games tier list, but Jacksepticeye played this game and told over 1 million people that it was good, so I think this is fair game. This is a ridiculously boring and drawn-out experience that has nothing to offer. It doesn't have a single scary or even memorable moment. It is so hollow. It is so generic. It doesn't have a single ounce of creativity. It doesn't have a single ounce of personality. Every second of this game is so dull that it is excruciating. But it does not compare to my number 2 pick for worst of the year, which is Garden of Banban 6 by the Euphoric Brothers. Between all the Banban games, 6 is my pick for the worst. It has a horrible use of the already bad drone, it has awful puzzles, and the gameplay is just painfully dull overall. It has stupid and obnoxious story, cutscenes, and dialogue that are so bad they simply should not exist. And man, this game is padded poorly. It is so padded. I made a whole video on this game. Obviously, it is one of the worst experiences I've had playing a game throughout this entire year. However, although it's one of the worst, it does not beat out my number 1, which is Spectator by Neko Machine. This game, borderline, should be illegal. Everything in this game is AI generated, and not only is there a morality argument to be made there, this was before AI generation was of any sort of quality, so the game looks absolutely atrocious. The gameplay loop is just an inferior version of other games, so why ever even play it, especially given that this one is way more expensive than most? The references and use of other existing media is embarrassing and awful, and clearly shows the developer had no interest in making the game something unique or memorable. And again, this game is optimized so badly that it will turn your PC into a fucking heater. There is no game that came out this year that's as offensively awful as this one. But now we can get into my top 3 best indie horror games of 2023. At number 3 for Best of the Year, I'm giving it to Slay the Princess by Black Tabby Games. This game is absolutely gorgeous with an amazing art style and aesthetic that is consistent but still varied. The writing in this game is outstanding and evokes so many feelings through just its vocabulary. The soundtrack is gorgeous and enhances all of the game's other qualities. It is just a beautiful visual novel with so much to offer. It's one of the best indie horror games of the year without a doubt. I absolutely adore this game, and I highly recommend it to everyone. At number 2 for my Best of the Year, I'm giving it to The Coffin of Andy and Lily from Nemly. As soon as people told me not to play this game because of how controversial it was, it basically guaranteed that I would like it, because I am a contrarian, I'm an asshole, and I don't like you. The artwork in this game is amazing and really creative. The vampiric and dark aesthetic is so charming and interesting and really explains the vibe of the game right off the bat. The soundtrack is eerie and disturbing and enhances all of the game's more subtle horror elements, and the more subtle approach to horror actually makes the game more disturbing a lot of the time, because it really messes with your head as everything gets crazier and crazier. The characters are terrible people, but that's what makes for a great story in this scenario, because you're following these psychotic, manic people whose relationship is so toxic as they just cause more and more destruction to their own lives and others. I don't care if this game is controversial or gross, because I love basically everything about it, and it's one of my favorites of the year, and becoming one of my favorite games of all time. However, number 1 for Best Indie Horror Game of the Year, in my opinion, goes to Rewind or Die from Comp 3 Interactive. This game is the best example I have seen of a slasher movie being turned into a video game, and I love that about it. The protagonist is so silly and cliche and has really fun dialogue, the slasher is really cool and feels iconic despite it being a very underrated game. The puzzles are some of the best I've seen in an indie horror game, and it's so cool to see the way everything always circles back to one another. There are some legitimately really solid scares along the way, and the chase sequences are especially amazing. The soundtrack feels like a cheesy slasher movie, and that's what I love about it. It's really cool. And I love the low poly PS1 era style, and it's executed better than a lot of games that attempt it, and I'm just a sucker for the style in general. I love the way this game looks, and it's a big part of the reason I wanted to play it at all. This is just such a well-made and fun horror game that has basically no flaws, and I appreciate it so much for everything it does. One of my favorite games ever, one of my favorite horror games ever, easily my pick for the best indie horror game of 2023. Before we wrap this video up, I want to add an additional category, that is the most anticipated upcoming indie horror games. As opposed to doing 3 for this one, I decided to make it 5 so we could shout out some other games. Yeah, these are upcoming indie horror games that I want to give some attention to before we close this off. First of all, Shipwreck 64 by Squeaks to Corgay. This game should be out pretty much at the same time that this video is released. Hopefully it is. Go play the game. I played the game early, and I will have a lot to say about it in the near future. It is a genuinely fantastic game, and everything about it is practically perfect. I absolutely adore this game. Hopefully it's up when this video is up. Go check it out. Go play it. Go show Squeaks to Corgay some love. This was a passion project that took a lot of time, and you can see that and you can experience that, and it is amazing. Please go check this game out. Next up, I want to talk about Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 from Mob Entertainment. This was also supposed to come out in 2023, but it was delayed slightly, but that's fine. Now we can just talk about how fucking excited we are for it. This chapter is clearly going in a more horror-focused direction, and I cannot wait to see that. It looks like it's going to actually succeed in it really well. The game genuinely looks very fun, and I'm especially excited to see the use of the new purple hand and also the gas mask. Catnap could definitely become one of the most iconic and interesting mascot monsters just ever. And yeah, this game looks really goddamn good. The visuals look stunning, the aesthetic is dark and gritty, which I didn't expect, or at least which I wouldn't have expected from just the first two chapters. I'm excited to see the new mechanics, I'm excited to see the new environments, I'm excited to follow the narrative. This game looks like it could genuinely be fantastic, so I'm really excited to play the new chapter of Poppy Playtime in early 2024. Next, I want to mention Bendy the Cage from the Meatly and Joey Drew Studios. Unfortunately, not as much is known about this game, but after Bendy and the Dark Revival being as good as it was, I'm looking forward to whatever the next Bendy game has to offer. The one screenshot we have doesn't tell us much, but it's just exciting to know that this is actively being worked on and could be seen in the near future. Bendy the Cage will be taking a more mature approach to the series, which is always exciting to me, especially because one of my only problems with the Dark Revival is that it's not scary. I'm really excited for the future of Bendy, which I never thought I would be, but I truly, truly am. Bendy the Cage, sure it's going to be a great time. Next up, I want to talk about Indigo Park from Unique Geese. All the promotional material of this game has been really charming and high quality, and the premise is really unique for a mascot horror game, and I'm really excited to see what Mason, Unique Geese, does with it. Unique Geese's recreation of Garten of Banban, Reincarnated, was a really impressive game that was made in a single week with no prior experience. So, a full game with a lot more time and resources is just really exciting to me. I'm just really interested in seeing how Unique Geese has improved, what this game will have to offer, how everything is executed, etc. I think this will actually be a really solid mascot horror game, and I also just really like Unique Geese, and I've seen a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes, and I'm really looking forward to it. And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to Glitched Out by SHB Games. This is the first game from famous YouTuber Super Horror Bro, which is really interesting. I didn't see this coming. The game appears to have a pretty unique visual style that I'm really excited to see in action, and also ML Spence is a part of this project, which guarantees quality. This game looks really cool, and I'm interested in seeing the direction they go in with it. I think it'll be a really creative game by the looks of it. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what Super Horror Bro has to offer after being within the indie horror scene for such a long time. And I think that's just an interesting experiment by itself. So that is everything I have to say for the Indie Horror Game Awards of 2023. That's not the name of this video, but that's basically what this is. I hope you guys like this idea. Again, I'll probably do it next year, hopefully with a little more structure to it, maybe some more categories and stuff like that, because there was some stuff that was cut from this one, and I definitely had to rush a couple parts of it to get it done by the end of the year, but yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know your favorites and least favorites of the year of the year. And yeah, I'm going to be doing a stream soon where I just kind of talk about stuff so we can have a more proper close to the year. But right now, just for the sake of it, I'll say thank you guys so much for the support you gave me this year. And I want to apologize for my inconsistency this year. I feel like I should have and could have done so much more. And I'm really hoping to bring a lot more to the table in 2024 and just make better content for you guys. Make more diverse content and make more consistent content, and hopefully grow this channel, grow the audience, and keep streaming and talking to you guys. I'm hopeful for the year. I'm as hopeful as I can be. So thank you guys so much for everything, and I'm excited to bring more, and I'm excited to see what indie horror accomplishes in 2024 because I actually think it could be a really good year. This year I would say was overall mediocre with some shining games released overall, though. I think 2024 could actually be a pretty damn good year. So let's just see what it has to offer. Thank you guys so much for everything. I'll see you guys later. Happy New Year.